Welcome everyone to our second session of Podcasting 101. We are taking a look today at interviewing skills, elements to engage our interviewees, and how that weaves into the greater podcast framework. We have our telecommunications and Durham College professor Raphael Francis with us, who just introduced himself, and maybe we'll have another chance for him to share a bit more today as well. We'll certainly ask a few questions of you, Raphael. And Dr. Clark, anything you want to share before we start our go around?
Just happy to be here. Happy to be here and to start our second meeting. It's an exciting journey, and what we talk about, what we're going to be delving in today, as Alicia said, is interviewing, and it's a naturalistic approach that we want to take so that we set at ease those people we are interviewing. And so I know our students are going to be involved in this, and so we'll simulate some interviewing here today so that you get a sense of what it's like. We'll also introduce some concepts so that you are aware of them, and hope you'll be able to find some of those concepts in our simulations, and at the same time to be able to give us some feedback about what you think and what it's like. So we hope you feel at ease and make it an exciting experience for you. So welcome.
Thank you. So we will actually just open the space for a moment to hear if anybody did any research of podcasts in the week between our sessions. And if you did, what podcast did you find? What did you like about it? What did you not like about it? Anybody can unmute and share.
And even if you did not do it this week, if you did one some time ago and liked it, this is your time to share it. So it doesn't have to be this week. So go ahead and share a podcast that you may have liked and what you liked about it. Go ahead, Jackie. If I see you light up, I'm not sure if that you want to talk, but if that's not what it is, that's okay too.
No, I'm just, my battery's dying.
Oh, okay. All right.
I can share. Go ahead, Dr.
Go ahead. No, I was just going to say, Raphael, I know Raphael has done a number of these, so you can go ahead. Go ahead, Alicia.
This morning, I listened to one of our colleagues, Alan McPherson, who we'll talk about later. He suggested a podcast called 20,000 Hertz, and it's all about different sounds and what is the origin of these sounds. And the episode I listened to was about, it's called the Windsor Hum. And in Windsor, across from the border of Detroit, there has been this sound, that ominous sound that nobody could identify for years. And sometimes it's so loud, it's rattling people's dishes. And they had done the podcast originally 5 years ago with no resolution of what the sound was, but they recorded it in different places. They had a sense, and then the people were complaining. The city put microphones all around the city trying to find, where is this sound coming from? And they thought it was coming from an island, which is actually used to be a steel factory and is guarded by Homeland Security. So the United States military is guarding this island. And they ended up, in the end, finding out what the sound was after all these years. And what I liked about, so they redid the podcast to this recent year and updated their response of finding what the sound was. And it was coming from the factory, from the Island. Um, but what I want to share that I liked about the podcast is one of the techniques the interviewer used was actually, we're just getting some feedback, so I've turned off I've just muted you, Pat. So what I enjoyed about it was the way they edited it. So the interviewer, you didn't hear him asking questions of the people. You just heard snippets of their story. And the podcast itself was less than 15 minutes, which I enjoyed because it's short. It was interesting. There was a mystery. The mystery got solved. It was very engaging. And it was a different style of interviewing people with the editing so that his voice was not heard asking questions, which is one of the techniques of documentary style filmmaking as well. And I have a sample I'll share with you about that towards the end. So that was a podcast, 20,000 Hertz, which was and all different kinds of investigations about strange sounds that are heard around the world. So you could really find a podcast about anything. And if you didn't find one this week, do search around before our next session and find a podcast that you think is interesting and why, and share with us why. So Joan, if you're just coming on, and Pat, we're just talking about any podcasts we listened to this week and what we liked about it. Does anybody else have anything to add before we move into our slideshow? Oh, Jackie, I can see you speaking. I'm just asking you to unmute there. You'll have to, there you go.
I don't have any podcasts that I listen to on a regular basis, but I listen to the CBC whenever I can. And I hear some interesting ones on the CBC. For example, they were talking about a lady, I don't remember her name. I can't remember what they called her. And she was driving around, I think in Rhode Island, and she was listening for sounds from the ocean. And they said that the fishes and all these other creatures down there make their own noises, which really surprised me that I thought they were just mute.
Thank you for sharing. And of course, CBC Radio has podcasts as well. So
I like CBC as well. Morning Ride. I think morning. I think that's the name of it, and I listen to it sometimes, and it's awesome. Found several of them which are exciting to listen to.
Yes.
Yeah.
So as you're listening to, after our session today, as you're all listening to radio, maybe when you drive or even the news, you'll have a different insight on how the interview is unfolding. And I hope, Dr. Clark, and I hope that you will have a different sense of listening for the interviewer and how they're asking questions and how they're kind of subtly guiding the conversation in a welcoming way that's inviting the interviewer to speak.
Yeah, and I think there are some concepts that will be introduced today. For example, soundbite. That you will be listening to. What really is that summary topic that the interview is about? How would you summarize that interview in a sentence or so? And that's something that you'll be listening to as well to find out, just like you were reporting, Jackie, about, and Alicia as well, what the interview was about. You are giving us the soundbite of that particular podcast. So when we do this simulation today, I'm hoping that you'll find out what this is as well.
Okay, so without further ado, we'll get into this slideshow, and it's not too long, so not to worry about that, and then we'll have some discussion as a group. So, welcome everyone. We have 2 more sessions of this series. So, we're moving fast through, and hopefully, you'll have a good sense of a foundation with interviewing as a podcast host after today. So, for interview skills and techniques, the situations and expectations hugely shape the behavior that happens in a conversation. Oh, I see I'm just going to stop sharing my video so that hopefully the connection will come through more clearly. In other words, the atmosphere of your interview is going to affect the way the person you're interviewing is responding to you. Now, in this climate of COVID, and we're still not through it yet, chances are the interviews will be done remotely. In other words, either by phone or online. So we don't have that extra luxury of being in person necessarily. So we need to work a little bit harder to establish that connection. So one of the ways to help make an inviting environment for the person who is being interviewed is to let them know it's a conversation, it's not a performance. Most people, once they get a microphone in front of them, or if you're interviewing for documentary filmmaking or anything like that, when the cameras are in front, a lot of people freeze and kind of lose the experience of just a conversation as if you were having a chat over coffee. So that's one of the ways you can set up an expectation that's more relaxed, by letting the person you're interviewing know that it's about a conversation and that there will be editing. So it doesn't have to be perfect. That can be a huge relief for people to hear. After this slideshow, we're going to have a group discussion about what makes you feel safe or at ease when you're in a conversation. And we'll try to apply some of those things to an interview. And how can you help the other person feel valued and heard? And what techniques can you use to create an inviting atmosphere? So we just talked about 2, which is that it's a conversation, not a performance, and that there will be editing after the interview. So it doesn't have to be perfect. And that can set a bit more of a relaxed environment where the stories can be shared. Dr. Clark was just speaking of sound bites. I think I missed a slide. No? Okay. And the sound bite you'll hear on the news all the time if you're listening to 6 o'clock news, whether it's on the radio or the TV. For example, when I was at the dentist yesterday, CP24 was playing, and the sound bite was all about borders, that the border between Canada and the US was open. So the soundbite was like, borders are open, long waits to cross the border. Americans are coming into Canada. How do people feel about that, given that Canadians are not yet permitted to go into the States for non-essential travel? So we do want to create an interview experience that is like a winding river, so that you can be willing to follow the interviewee and transition with them. So let's say the person who's being interviewed is telling a story, and you ask them, can you share a crossroads moment about your life where you made a decision and it changed your life? And so let's say the person said they got married, but then they started going really far off into a story about, we booked the venue, but the venue booking fell through, and you can follow them. You don't want to cut someone off, because that would, especially in an interview that's not live, well, you don't want to cut anyone off anyway, but in the case of the interviews we would be doing, it's all recorded. It's not live. It can be edited. So you can, for the sake of building a connection with the person, you can follow them and let them lead you a little bit off course. But then you can ask the interviewee if they can reduce their experience to one important lesson they learned, what would that be? Or, if you could share in a couple sentences how getting married changed your life, how would you describe that in a few sentences? So there's ways, if you notice, because as an interviewer, you will have a goal for your podcast. If your podcast is about crossroads moments and life-changing decisions, you want them to keep to um, that theme. And that being said, you can edit out some of the other stuff. So that's one way to get a sound bite. If you're not hearing what is that powerful lesson learned or a summary of the interview, something that's engaging that you could even use for promotion and social media. So that's the importance of a sound bite. And if you're noticing you don't have that sound bite yet, you can ask one of those questions that will help them to reduce the experience to a few sentences or a lesson learned. So we're going to give this a try and do a sample interview. Now, actually, before we do that, I'm going to stop the share. And we'll just have a little bit of conversation. Let's start with what makes you feel comfortable or at ease. Let's say if you were meeting with a stranger for coffee, or if you picture yourself being interviewed, what is something that would help you to feel comfortable? And maybe what's a technique that you use? I know Raphael hosts a wonderful radio show on Zoom on Thursdays, and he seems to have such a comfortable audience who are there participating, sometimes dancing. So Raphael, anytime if you can pop in too with what's the secret there? Because it's not obvious. Raphael's pretty smooth. How do you create a welcoming environment?
Well, first of all, you have to assess the audience that you're speaking to. And in my case, the audience primarily are people in my age group. So we had something in common, the music from the 50s and the 60s, and we have an opportunity to reminisce. And I try to make people feel confident. Sit back, relax. It's not a stressful situation. And what I find is that if you give people an opportunity to think back to the days when something very pleasant happened, like the first time they heard a song, or the first time they went out, when they were allowed to go out on a date. Some of them remember where they were when they heard this particular song. And I even take them back to the days when we didn't have iPads, but we always had a notebook so that somebody would write down the words of the song and you would share it with your friends, okay? And we started a conversation around that. And now and again, I try to lighten the mood by making a feeble attempt at being funny. But you see, I spend so many times in front of the public, in front of a classroom, talking with people. So it comes really natural for me. And other people, even comedians have stage frights, they freeze as soon as I put a microphone in front of them. You got to learn to relax and think about speaking to an audience of one. Just think of speaking to an audience of one. I'm sure you're not going to freeze if you're sitting now in front of Dr. Clark to talk to him. But you imagine yourself talking to 5,000 people in an auditorium. All of a sudden, it's a different type of emotional reaction you'll get to that.
Mm-hmm. That's so helpful. Yeah, thank you. Raphael pointed out a really important tool, which is to find a point of connection. For him, it's the age group of the people who is in his audience. So That's the other second really important soundbite we can take from Raphael's sharing, is that know who you're interviewing. Do a little bit of background research, or you can have a pre-conversation, which is very common, that you would have a first conversation before the actual day of the interview, and get to know a little bit about that person's story, get to know what you have in common. And that commonality is a nice way to open up conversation even before you hit record on your device. You might just start saying, hey, I heard that you're from Trinidad. Well, I am too. And you can just start, or I heard you're interested in travel. So that's a way that you can find that connection and create a more welcoming environment. Anybody else have ideas about what makes you feel safe or comfortable in a conversation, or how to make someone feel welcome and at ease?
Following up on what was said about creating a space for comfort, uh, intergenerational spaces is sometimes younger people are not necessarily feeling comfortable with older folks, but we are attempting to kind of normalize that space. And that's what we're actually doing at this point. So I would certainly like our younger audience to feel comfortable in sharing. Hopefully, at this point, you are able to, but if you are not, then, it will happen.
But can I share? I'd like to share that many times we think that we are the only one and that it's happening to us. And like someone said before, that a lot of professionals feel a sense of fear. So if you believe it's just about you, then that fear could intense. But if you come to realize that, people feel it, so, you're not unique, just become comfortable and go for it. But when we feel it's like only us, I'm the only one that's experiencing this, and there are professionals who come out and speak like so smooth, it's not true. So that's what I try to encourage younger people to feel comfortable, because most people have that fear, but they can overcome it.
And also, what I experienced recently, you can just pick something that you see that you can relate to, in terms of, like, now we all wear a mask. So I went into a store recently and I was wearing a mask, and I asked this young lady for help, and she looked at me and she said, "I can see you're a Jamaican." And I thought, I wasn't sure where she was going with it, but I was wearing a mask and it had black, green, and gold colors on it. And so she used that as an opening to introduce herself. And she said, "I am also from Jamaica." So that was a jumping off point for us to talk about something that we have in common. So it could be a pet, it could be whatever, but it's for the young person's opportunity there to start a conversation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's like the other day I was walking around, it was just the time we had 123 from Jamaica. And in the race, the female, the women's race. And there was, I had on my jersey, my Jamaican jersey, not wearing it now. And somebody was driving by and he stopped and said, "Hey, me a Jamaican, you know." So
That's right.
that was that was a jumping off point where we
Yeah,
got the opportunity. So even the clothes you wear, yeah,
yeah.
and so on, even how you talk might be a way to develop a relationship and make people comfortable. So and Raphael, he's good at remembering jokes. He does a great job of that, and that's a good way putting people at ease as well. With a moment, of talking a good joke. Yeah, humor.
Who else can share ideas about how to create a welcoming interviewing space? Or maybe it's how to support the interviewer to feel calm. If you have ever felt nervous, and what tools you use to help yourself regulate, then you're welcome to share that too. Mary or Haley, did any contributions that you'd like to share?
How I feel like make a comfortable environment during an interview is by making eye contact and sharing experiences, because sometimes that person can't open up because they feel like they can't relate to you or what you are thinking. So if you are able to share an experience that you think they might relate to, it helps them to open up, to share and to communicate without even thinking about what they're doing.
That's such a good point, Haley. Make yourself vulnerable as the interviewer. Share something personal about yourself, before the interview gets started, just to level the playing field, let's say, so it's not like you're mining for gold in the other person. It's a shared experience, and you're discovering together what will unfold, because you never know what stories are going to come out yourself. Thank you for that very important point. Anybody else, Joan or Mary, anything to add about creating safe space, or how to make the interviewer or interviewee comfortable?
Can I also share another thing? And this is not about an interview necessarily, but I remember doing a French course, and I'm not about testing. I didn't think I knew enough French. So every time there was an opportunity for a testing, I would not be able to recall any of what I knew. And I remember the teacher one day, we would arrive at the class. I would arrive just past 3, but the class didn't start until almost 3:45. And that particular day, we knew we were having a test when the class started. And we arrived at the class at different times, but as we came in, he would speak to us in French. And through this whole process of waiting for the other members of the class to join, he was asking us stuff in French. And we were having this lovely conversation, but in a relaxed atmosphere. And that went on for about 45 minutes. And then when the class officially started at 4:00, he said, the test is over. Because we were so relaxed, we didn't even think we were in a test, but we were speaking in French. So if we can, in an interview, if we can make the atmosphere relax and the participants relax enough to go through the session, it will be easier than just focusing on, we have this interview.
Mm-hmm. Thanks,
I like
Jackie.
that. I like that very much. I think, and this is where we have to become creative and be empathic. Empathy is so important because we know what it's like when we feel nervous. And so when somebody can put themselves in a place where that's where the person might be, and I would like them to feel the way I would like to feel. Um, so that's something that will definitely change today, because it's a power structure here. It's a power dynamic that is at play, whether or not we want to call it that. It is the interviewer is in charge, and so if he can, by whatever means possible, give up some of his power,
Mm-hmm.
I think it sets the other person at ease and let them be in the power seat. Yeah.
One of the things Haley mentioned as well, that's important to pick up on, because a lot of us will be doing interviews over Zoom. There's a way that you can record the audio separately. There's other platforms that can be used too, but that's one we're using here. So although you can't really make direct eye contact because you're either looking at the screen at the person or looking into the camera, so it looks like you're looking at them, facial expression is going to encourage the person to keep going. And in my experience with filmmaking, documentary style filmmaking, as the interviewer, You don't want to be going, yes, as the other person's talking, because it's very hard to edit yourself out. And it complicates the story. So practicing smiling, nodding, raising your eyebrows, so, or at the very least, wait till they finish until you respond, so that when you're editing, you can make choices about whether or not you are in the piece. And maybe at some points you will have yourself saying, yeah, but you don't want that all the way through. So that's something to take note of as well, that body language, and becoming aware of the unconscious ways that we respond with sound. And when you're with podcast, you're only working with sound, so you don't have the distraction of the video. So people will really hear and get annoyed if you're ing all the way through.
Alicia, I would like to also add that one way to make people feel comfortable is to show that you have some interest in not only who they are, but sometimes where they came from. If I was talking to some Jamaicans, invariably, I'm going to mention something about Jamaica. I've been to Don Rivers Fall. I've been to Ocho Rios. I've been to Port Antonio. I've been to it shows that you have taken the time to find out about where they came from. So if I'm talking about a Pakistani, I've never been to Pakistan, but we probably talk about cricket, something that they have in common. And that would establish a sort of a common jumping off point. And from there on, yeah.
Awesome.
Yes.
Okay. So I think we could jump off now into that, Alicia. And, okay. So first of all, so I want you to be on the lookout for, what we are going to talk more about, what this is about, and what did you pick up from this interview. So, so here we go. I'm so happy that we can be here together, Alicia. We have been on this journey for a while, and I know some things about you, but some things I'm not so sure about. But I know that when we first met, the caring kind of person you were, and that was something that really hit me. And we have talked about that story so many times and shared it. But one of the areas of interest that I think we both share is that of a caring for generational spectrum. And that's something that we'd like to dig deeper in today. For me, I never really had grandparents that I knew. They were dead before I came along, but and sometimes I think it might be a search for that. So, tell me a little about your experience with your grandparents.
Okay. I want to first say I'm sorry that you didn't have that experience growing up with grandparents. And for me, growing up in a household living with my grandparents, it almost opened up a whole new world for me, because my parents, my mom was working full time. My dad was not in the picture. I later got a stepdad who I call my dad, but my mom was working 3 jobs, and she was really busy and didn't have a lot of time for me per se, or that's my experience of it. But my grandparents were there, and they opened up this world that was, I just have vivid pictures of my mom running up and down stairs in high heels, putting on lipstick and running out the door and going to her different corporate job, and then bartending at night. And so I have fleeting memories of her. But with my grandparents, I remember the way that if I was upset, they would say, oh, it's okay. My grandma's famous saying is, by the time you're married, it'll be over. Or if you hurt yourself, oh, it'll be better by the time you're married. And that's kind of a joke because I'm not married. I didn't get married. So yeah, I guess it will be better after 40 years. So the experience of having grandparents around gave me a sense of security, of familial support. It offered me perspective on life, which was different from my mom, who was quite busy rushing around and trying to make ends meet. Whereas my grandparents offered me a perspective of everything will work out in the end, or, don't sweat the small stuff kind of attitude.
Tell me about this whole matter of security. What does that mean to you even today?
That's a really good question. I think it comes back to love and knowing that it's like presence and love. So I knew that there were people who could be present to me when I needed that. And for me, that is still relevant in my sense of security as a person in the world. I don't have a partner. Sometimes people get security from a partnership, a romantic relationship or partnership or a marriage, or from creating their own family and having children, which I also don't have. So the community that I build around me that I know will be present when I need support or guidance, and that they genuinely love and care about me. So I know that their intention and their heart is in a place of wanting to support me, and that makes me feel secure.
Tell me a little about your dad. How does that in terms of security, does that have anything to do with how you feel?
I would actually rather not talk about that in this interview. That's not a comfortable topic for me, so I'll leave that one aside and maybe we can go to a different question.
Of course, I understand. But in terms of your grandmother, who is your grandmother still around?
My grandmother passed away when I was, gosh, I guess it would be almost 10 years ago. And my fondest memories are really when she would come home from work every day. She's Jamaican and always had long skirts on. And when she would come home from work, I would run under her skirt. So I would be 4 or 5. I would hold her legs and walk wherever she went. It became this tent. It was like this island of safety, and I would move around under the umbrella of her skirt. And she would go about her business in the kitchen preparing dinner, and there I would be attached to one of her legs, shuffling around. So
such fun memories. Such
Mm-hmm.
fun memories. Is there any question that you'd like to ask of me, Alicia?
I wonder, thank you for lessening the power dynamic and opening that possibility for me to ask a question too. I wonder what you're learning as a grandparent that maybe you didn't experience having grandparents, but what are you learning as a grandparent that's important?
Yeah, thank you. It's such. I'm learning as I go along because it's not like I had a script before, or even experienced what it was like. But I'm learning and I'm enjoying my grandkids. Speaking about, it's interesting. My latest grandson is now. He has this fun way of doing exercise. And so this week he was not with us, but he has learned with me about doing abs. It's interesting. And he's just about, he's not even 2 yet. But when I do abs, I say 1, 2, 3, and he's doing that. So this morning, his mom called me and was talking about that, and he was there in the background doing his abs and doing the splits. So there's so much that I'm learning as I go along, but it's really is interesting.
So just to go a little deeper with that, if you could say one thing that you're learning that's important that you're learning as a grandparent, that's important that you provide your grandchild, what would that thing be?
It would be building connections and relationships, even with respect to my own children. It's a different dynamic. Um, just like you talk about your mom, how she was busy. We, as parents, we were busy going out and never had the chance to develop some of those relationships that I now take holds so closely to my life now. And yeah, I wish I could go back to that time where I could develop that relationship with my own children, but I now have a second chance to develop relationship. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I think we can close. I think you and I could interview each other for a long time, but now we're going to close this and give everybody a chance to share what they saw, what they noticed. So anybody have any response or reflection? There's some things that we did intentionally in there, and you can point out what you thought worked well and what didn't work well.
I like the fact that you took, how should I say it? When you were asked a question about your father and you felt vulnerable, that you actually said to the interviewer, I would rather not speak to that.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a positive. Sometimes we're in a situation and we think we have to say something and it destroys us and it makes us vulnerable. So that's good. I like that about that.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for picking that up, Jack.
Actually, that was quite intentional because that's one area that we would like people to be aware of, that it could be a case, it could work either way. After giving some of my power to Alicia as the interviewee, she could have done something similar to me and I would have responded in a similar manner. So I think it is important for us to understand that we have vulnerabilities that we have not yet mastered, and we perhaps don't feel comfortable with it yet. And we can bow out, and it's not the interviewer's place to continue to dig at it. You perhaps have seen interviewers who have continued to dig and dig and dig, and it's not a good thing. So I think that's something that we should respect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. As the interviewer or the interviewee, you're allowed to make boundaries always. And that's part of how we want to create a safe container here and outside of here, is that if you're ever not comfortable, you have the power to say so. And there's a lot of ways you could say, oh, can we move to the next question? I'm actually not comfortable with that. Thanks for pointing that out, Jackie. Anybody else notice anything that worked, didn't work, an idea you'll take for your own interviews?
If we didn't cover something and you think it's worthwhile especially for our younger audience, I think please go ahead and point it out, because it's important that we do that. For the younger audience, I'd also ask if there's anything that you think that should have been covered and you did not see it, or if something that you are not so sure of, Because we are going to have a breakout room that we are going to be able to let you practice for a little bit. So we're going to do that in a moment. But if there's anything else, please let us know.
I
I would
like
like,
your vulnerability when you said that people see people and they expect them, I guess, to be such perfect parents. And I could relate to what you said, that we weren't as perfect with our children because we were busy again making a life. And but now we are better at it with our grandchildren.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And I think it did put some context to what Alicia was saying. And in fact, it's also not only is an interview a place for knowledge, but it's also perhaps a place of healing. It could very well be. So Alicia could perhaps be thinking, oh, this is now I can relate to what happened with my parents, because I'm now learning that this is a human condition, and it was not just because my mother did not love me, but it was something that she was dealing with. I think it also is that kind of thing which we take away as well.
what I like about the interview, Leroy, is that Alicia lit up when you asked the question about her relationship with her grandmother. And it was all about when her grandmother would come home and she was a little girl and she'd hang onto her grandmother's legs. And then she pivoted and asked the question of you about how you feel and relate with your grandchildren. Okay, I thought that was a nice transition in view of the fact that you were not privileged to grow up with grandparents. Okay? But she gave you an opportunity to express the grandparently feeling towards your own grandchildren.
Awesome.
Excellent.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you'll notice that there's a lot of learning that was going on here. Now, somebody was listening to that as a podcast. Now, talking about how we put different stakes in the ground as to how we build a story. Little points in the ground, and it could be how do we build a story? You notice we did not have scripts, okay, and that was intentional. That you want your conversation to be a relationship building as well. And so I was not looking at paper while I'm asking the question. Neither was Alicia looking at paper. We were developing a relationship and getting something. Not only were we getting knowledge out there, but we were developing a relationship as well.
And that's one of the techniques to help keep the thread of connection, is actually that you will memorize your key questions as the interviewer. As soon as you look down at your paper, you're breaking the connection. And it's usually something that interviewers do maybe at the very end of an interview. They look over their questions and say, let me just see if I've missed anything. One of the memorization techniques is to give yourself an image for each question. And you might have a page that has images, or you're just holding them in your mind. So that can help you. As it's not the end of the world if you have a paper, but if you are going to look at your paper, rather than breaking that connection, we all know how that feels when someone just picks up their phone and turn away. It doesn't feel good. Suddenly it's broken. So instead you can say, you know what? I think I'm just going to take a moment here. Let me look at my page to get back on track if you forget, so that you're saying out loud. It's different when someone says, oh, just a second, I'm waiting for a text. Let me look. Then you still feel a part of what's happening. So
Alicia, there's another advantage because you were not doing an interview with a script there. It seemed to flow more naturally. It was easygoing, and as though it was so conversational, you would not know that it was a rehearsed interview.
Absolutely.
You, Raphael. And to your point, Raphael, you never know if you let the conversation flow like that, you never know what's going to come up. If
Right.
you cut them off and guide them back to your questions, you might be missing out on some gold that was about
Yeah.
to come up. So
Yeah.
sometimes pausing and letting that silence be there for the person you're interviewing rather than jumping to the next question. If they go quiet, sometimes people are tracking back in their mind. There's more to the story and they're recalling it. So it can be good to leave some pauses. And for those of you who are thinking, how am I going to remember all of this? We have 4 documents, PDFs that a friend of ours shared with us who took a course on interviewing. And so we will have those links that we send out to you, and we'll put them in Slack so that you can look back. They're short, they're each maybe 2 or a couple pages. And so you can refer back to that, and we'll have the recording of this as well that we'll send to you. So you can always refer back to that. Now already we're getting, the time is
Yeah.
running out. So we're going
Oh,
to
yeah.
we're going to put us, we're going to split into 2 groups. So once you get it, and we'll be there for maybe 10 minutes or less, because we have to figure out what technology everyone's using before we end this call so we can be prepared for the editing part of our course next week. So Dr. Clark will put us into 2 separate rooms, and you'll decide who's going to be interviewed. And maybe you have 2 interviewers going back and forth, or you take turns. And maybe as a group you can generate some questions too, and we'll give you notice when it's time to come back. If you're running out of questions or you have a question for us, you can type it in the chat box. But hopefully, Dr. Clark, you and I will each be in a separate room.